Okay, welcome back everyone, and well done to everyone who's managed to navigate through the platform and successfully access the rapid rehousing session. Really delighted today that, moving on from the Minister's remarks earlier and John Sparks's comments about the Homelessness Action Group, that we're going to be looking at rapid rehousing in a little bit more detail today. We're really pleased that we've got a fantastic panel from across the housing and homelessness sector. We've got Ruth from Shelter Cymru, who will be kind of, reflecting on Shelter Cymru's perspectives on this from some of the work that they've been doing with Welsh Government and other stakeholders as we explore this rapid rehousing issue. We're also really pleased to be joined by Gaynor Toft from Pembrokeshire County Council, who is one of the original members of the Homelessness Action Group, and a special thanks to Gaynor, who stepped in fairly last minute to cover for us, and we're really looking forward to hearing what she's got to share. And last but certainly not least, we'll be joined by Catrin, who is the new Director of Housing at Cadwyn Housing Association, who brings a wealth of experience from homelessness, but will bring us the RSL viewpoint going forward. So what is rapid rehousing? So rapid rehousing is about taking a housing-led approach for rehousing people that have experienced homelessness and making sure that, crucially, they reach a settled housing option as quickly as possible, rather than staying in temporary accommodation for too long, which I think far too often we see that happening. So that could mean, people who do become homeless, where it can't be prevented, that they get a settled mainstream housing outcome as quickly as possible, that critically time spent in any form of temporary accommodation is reduced to an absolute minimum, but also we have fewer transitions as possible. So we don't see people moving from floor space to pods to hostels to other types of temporary accommodation, and then finally getting a permanent housing solution. And when temporary accommodation is needed, it's the optimum type is mainstream furnished and within a community. And I guess rapid rehousing also includes people where their needs are maybe beyond just housing, including housing first for people who have complex needs, who might need support with a number of different areas in their lives, such as mental health issues or substance use issues, and that is also available some specialist provision that's trauma informed, that can support people either in housing first or in supported accommodation. So as I've said, the focus is on getting people into permanent accommodation as quickly as possible, but also delivering that support alongside. And for some people, that might mean no support. For some people, it's simply about getting access to that housing as soon as possible. And for other people, there might be a period of low-level transitional support. And for others, there may need to be that more intensive multi-agency support for a much longer period of time. But it's all about being person-centred and understanding what those needs are. But being housing-led and, importantly, having settled accommodation is at the heart of this. So we've already heard earlier today John reflecting on some of the work up in Scotland, where they set out rapid rehousing transition plans. And that's where they, in Scotland, set out the local housing market and homelessness context, provided a baseline position for temporary accommodation supply, and then set out a 5-year vision, as John said, for moving towards rapid rehousing and reducing that reliance on temporary accommodation. And at the heart of that was co-ownership and partnership working across the sector, both within housing and outside of housing as well. So the context in Wales, as John set out, is that the Homelessness Action Group produced a number of reports for the Welsh Government, and rapid rehousing was at the heart of each of those 3 reports. The recommendation was that rapid rehousing should be at the heart of any approach, the default approach to supporting people at risk of homelessness or people who are sleeping rough. And the second report went into much more detail about local authorities and Welsh Government working together to prioritise sustaining tenancies and rapid rehousing, which of course includes housing first, making sure that at the end of a transition period, a suggested period of 5 years, that rapid rehousing approaches were scaled up and there was much less reliance on emergency accommodation. Obviously, in the meantime, we've had the pandemic, and as John mentioned, that has accelerated the focus on transition and rapid rehousing. So there is the potential that we may be able to do that in a much shorter period of time, but we should be aware of the challenges that are out there. The most recent report that the Homelessness Action Group published focused in more detail on rapid rehousing, talked about building on phase 2 in particular, supporting local authorities to set out their vision, how they can utilise social housing, how they could utilise the private rented sector, the conditionality that local authorities may use, such as intentionality and priority need, so that all people have access to settled housing within that transition period. Now, I think it's really important to say that no one has all the answers on rapid rehousing. It's a really great ambition to have, and it's absolutely the direction that we should be travelling in Wales. But as the Minister and John reflected, there are many challenges, not least housing supply and the need for support at all sorts of levels of intensity. So I don't think anyone on this panel has the answers, but the panel today is all about starting that conversation, hearing some of the reflections and thoughts from people who are working within the sector about what the challenges are as we move forward, and of course what the opportunities are to take forward rapid rehousing. So first up, I'm delighted to invite Ruth Power, who is relatively newish, I don't know if you can still call that, Director at Shelter Cymru, who will be sharing her reflections on rapid rehousing going forward. Welcome, Ruth.
I'm definitely still using the new card, so thank you for that. I'm going to talk to you about the transition to rapid rehousing, using the sort of lens of it being a process, not an event. There are a lot of common themes that you'll hear in my presentation from what we talked about earlier, and I'm taking that as a positive actually, and reflecting the sense of shared vision and shared commitment that there is in Wales. So Shelter Cymru, we exist to end homelessness, and we see daily the emotional and practical impact of homelessness on the lives of the people that we help. So we are really positive about the move to rapid rehousing. Firstly, what I'm going to take to successfully realise rapid rehousing, and then I'm going to talk about the relationship between rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. So firstly, turning to what it would take, we've sort of worked up a model that we wanted to share with you today, that's in the slide set, which sets out the way that we see rapid rehousing as having 3 building blocks. Before I mention those though, it's important to say that rapid rehousing, it is system transformation. This is not any kind of quick fix. And I was really pleased to hear that reflected in Julie James's presentation as well. We've identified 3 building blocks in that triangle, as you'll see. Each of them is going to take time to mobilise. Each of them will take time to deliver. And more importantly, they will take time to integrate. So I'm going to talk you through those 3 elements of that triangle, focusing particularly on culture change. So clearly, as you've heard, without an adequate supply of homes, rapid rehousing is simply a pipe dream. There were 5,500 people in temporary accommodation across Wales in December, so this is a challenge not to be underestimated. From Shelter Cymru's perspective, we want to see people accessing secure, genuinely affordable homes, i.e. social homes, and with our partners, CIH and Tai Pawb, we are lobbying for the legally binding right to adequate housing that you heard a little about earlier. And that's a progressively realised right. We are realistic about that ambition, but it is intended to drive that level of investment that is needed in social housing in particular. In terms of access in housing, we welcome the move that rapid rehousing presents away from the need to prove that you are tenancy ready, but there are other barriers to rapid rehousing. So for example, we would like to see a really creative and not a punitive approach to former tenant arrears, and we would like to see offers of accommodation that are suitable for individuals' needs. Moving on to another corner of the triangle, support. We've heard a lot about support, and a rapid rehousing model depends significantly on the availability of timely and flexible support. And as we've heard, at one end of the continuum are those households requiring no support. At the other end of the continuum are people who may benefit from a housing first model, and they're likely to have high and complex needs and a history of unsettled housing or rough sleeping. I haven't seen as yet a national estimate of how many people in each local authority area will require a particular level of support, a particular type of support. And without this, I find it hard to know if there is sufficient buy-in from the right partners within and crucially outside of housing. and whether there's enough capacity across all sectors required to provide the support as needed to enable some people to be successfully rapidly rehoused. And we've heard a lot about the successes today, quite rightly so, and it's absolutely right that we celebrate them. I also have to mention that in Shelter Cymru, we frequently see people who fall through the net and don't access the support that they require. So we're particularly interested in the complex task of mobilising cross-sector support. If support is lacking, there is a real risk that rapid rehousing enables the most vulnerable to both secure and lose accommodation more quickly. Turning to the top of that triangle, change of delivery model and culture. Whilst rapid rehousing does present challenges, as we've heard, if there is sufficient cross-sector, political and senior level commitment to change, we firmly believe that it can succeed. But fundamental to successfully delivering rapid rehousing are our beliefs. So do we believe that people have the right to a good home? Do we believe they have the right to the physical conditions and the psychological security that enables people to put down roots, to engage in education, treatment or employment, and to get on with their lives free from the strain and the disruption of living in temporary accommodation? And do we believe that people who've been homeless are part of the problem, or do we see listening to their voices as part of the solution? If Welsh Government, RSLs, local authorities and support providers are guided by the same set of values as we hold, then homeless households will notice that they are treated as individuals. They're treated with kindness and humanity. It was great to hear Julie James using that word. Homeless services will ask what package of support would enable them to rehouse a household rapidly. How with ready partners can they get that support in place? RSLs and local authorities will work in mature partnerships to make stock available to homeless households. And the model for delivering homelessness services and rapid rehousing will be challenged. It'll be challenged by what we learn from people who are homeless. It'll be challenged by our growing understanding of the root causes of homelessness. And it'll be challenged by what we learn about people's needs as we begin to deliver rapid rehousing. So I hope I've made the point via that model, that the what it would take triangle, what it would take to realise rapid rehousing. It's complex, it's a significant process of cultural change, but it's a welcome and a really ambitious change. Turning now to the relationship between rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. We really welcome the opportunity that rapid rehousing presents to make the experience of homelessness a brief one. But going back to the HAG recommendations that you've heard about today, the HAG recommendations also focus on making homelessness rare and non-recurrent. And we know that for some households, homelessness can be a revolving door. So if we're going to reduce the number of people who are experiencing and re-experiencing the trauma of homelessness, and if we're going to enable people and communities to achieve long-term stability via rapid rehousing, then we need to establish a virtuous circle of homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. We need to reduce the number of households becoming homeless and so in need of rapid rehousing. And at the same time, we need to ensure that people who are rapidly rehoused do not risk becoming homeless again. And you'll see in that model a flavour of what that means in practice. That means not pressurising households into accommodation which is clearly unsuitable for their needs. It means making sure that we're offering pre-tenancy support, multi-agency wraparound support, financial help, be that income maximisation, using discretionary housing payments creatively to prevent homelessness, helping to ensure that people don't move into their tenancy with high costs and start off with arrears they never shake off. And we also need to make sure that when households are at risk of homelessness, they've got early access to independent advice. And then back to the importance of culture. Social landlords making a commitment to end evictions into homelessness, from our point of view, is absolutely crucial. When our system fails to avert evictions into homelessness, it's homeless households, 23% of whom have children. It's their lives and life chances that are being damaged, and it's the public purse that is picking up the cost. So in conclusion, if rapid rehousing is to deliver long-term benefits for the most vulnerable households, Shelter Cymru believes it must be embedded in a joined-up housing and multi-agency support system. A system that invests in prevention and early intervention, a system which views homelessness as a sign of multi-agency failure, a system which plans for the success of rapid rehousing, but is brave enough to learn from the challenges of implementation, and vitally a system which is driven by an unstoppable commitment to everybody in Wales having the right to a good home. Diolch.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That was a fantastic start to the panel discussion today. Highlighted some really critical issues there and some of the things that we're going to have to think about moving forward. Delighted that next up we're going to hear from Gaynor Toft from Pembrokeshire County Council. As I said, Gaynor was a member of the Homelessness Action Group, so was familiar with the work that went on to put the recommendations forward to the Minister. And I think the local authority voice in all of this is absolutely critical. They will be at the heart of issues around supply, around support, but also around some of the culture and the approaches to determining whether people qualify for housing or not. So a big welcome to Gaynor. Reminder to everyone, if you want to submit questions, we'll hopefully have 10 minutes for questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you. Welcome, Gaynor.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Katie. Thank you. I'm sorry that I don't have any snazzy slides to show you, but so you'll have to put up with watching my ugly mug. Sorry. So I'll just sort of give the local authority perspective, really, in terms of what some of our thoughts are, experiences, and sort of challenges and opportunities, really, as far as moving forward on this rapid rehousing agenda is concerned. We're truly committed to rise to the challenge of this opportunity to transform the use of temporary accommodation, so that temporary accommodation is only used for a very short period of time, and to contribute to the ending of homelessness in Wales. During lockdown, I'm sure you've already heard in this morning's presentations how local authority has taken on more accommodation, with 600 additional people now housed within 6,000 people, sorry, now housed within accommodation, temporary accommodation, and this ranges from the use of social housing properties to B&Bs, to holiday accommodation. So as well as, obviously, we would not have been able to achieve that without the support of third sector providers, without the contributions of our housing association partners. So the partnership contribution in terms of achieving what we have achieved under the temporary accommodation that we've taken on has been a true partnership approach. Obviously, without the funding from Welsh Government under the hardship funding, and about the flexibility in terms of how we've been able to re-profile our housing support grant contracts to enable the housing support to be provided where necessary as well. We recognise that we are now dealing with many who have very clear needs, who we wouldn't have historically accommodated, and it's quite clear from Julie James's intentions that the priority needs status and the intentionality that this is the new norm, as what we've been told by Welsh Government colleagues. So we recognise that we are now in that new world, and it's a case of how can we move forward with the ambitions and the rapid rehousing strategies that we need to move towards. In the long term, obviously, what we would like is to ensure that we have the capacity to provide increased focus on prevention and early intervention to reduce and prevent homelessness in the first instance. And this has to work hand in hand with the rapid rehousing approach, breaking that cycle of repeat homelessness. For example, I'm just using a Pembrokeshire example. What we've been looking at over recent months is trying to unpick those revolving door cases, trying to understand why we are having those repeat presentations of homeless. And we've been doing that piece of research for those who we've had representing 3 or more times as homeless over the past 3 years. And there's over 160 of those in Pembrokeshire, where we are trying to look through those cases to really understand why we do have that revolving door findings and what we can actually do to prevent that happening. What we're keen to ensure is that under this partnership working is that ending homelessness is everyone's business. And I'm sure you've heard that term mentioned many times today. And we've been saying that as local authorities for many years. We all have that part to play, and we all have to be equally committed to this agenda. And I'm saying that also from a political perspective as well. We have challenges within our organisations to make sure that this is a corporate agenda, as well as a partnership agenda across public service boards, across regional partnerships, as well as operationally as well. So it's really important that we need to work more closely with partners in health, our mental health services, our substance misuse services, within social care, bringing our probation colleagues along with us, including the housing associations and third sector as well, so that we've got a flexibility and choice for individuals to ensure that they have a positive outcome in relation to their life situation. But we do recognise that we've got huge challenges in moving forward in this rapid rehousing approach, in order to ensure that the effectiveness of this policy will ensure that we've got that adequate supply of suitable and accessible accommodation. So we are concerned in terms of coming out the other end of lockdown. We are seeing light at the end of the tunnel, with the vaccinations being offered for homeless, which is extremely positive. But we also are concerned in relation to those, the easing of the restrictions on evictions. What is going to happen in terms of the increased presentations that we are going to see as far as homeless is concerned. Because local authorities are already struggling to cope with the demand. We are saying to Welsh Government, we need that sustained investment of both revenue and capital, not just the capital investment, but that revenue. We welcome the increase of 40 million for housing support grant, but what we're seeing is that we do question, is that going to be enough? Is the capacity going to be sufficient to meet that need? We're seeing that there is a huge need in one bed accommodation, and we cannot build quickly enough. So we're trying to not underestimate the scale of the challenge. Increasing the supply of new affordable housing is going to be a challenge for us all. Again, we welcome the increase in social housing grant, up to 250 million now across Wales, and we are awaiting what our allocations will be, which I think we are hoping will come through in the next few weeks. But that's not to underestimate the scale of how quickly we can actually build to meet that need. So we need to look at other ways as well. How can we make the best use of the stock to increase supply? Let's look at the accommodation that we've got. How can it be repurposed? For example, within Pembrokeshire, again, we are looking at our sheltered accommodation is unfit for purpose, but can it be repurposed for other reasons? Can it be used for one bed, meeting the one bed needs, for more general needs accommodation, or for a supported housing model as well? We're looking at what about empty properties. We have databases as far as empty properties is concerned. How can we work with private homeowners or property developers in relation to converting empty properties back into use, be it for small shared accommodation, or whether we've got blocks of accommodation which need to be converted into flats. So it is about looking at what stock we've got out there already, working with planning colleagues, for example, in relation to what planning applications are coming through, which could be that we could be working with private developers to see whether there are any turnkey developments that we could sort of use for accommodation for the specific needs. We recognise that we also need to look at our allocations policies. How do we increase allocations to homeless households? This is a significant challenge to us as local authorities and with our RSL's colleagues as well, holding these allocation policies. What do these changes need to look like as far as our policies are concerned? And how can we get political buy-in in relation to getting these policy changes agreed? You know, that is something that we are all looking at within our local areas. We have a backlog of need which has been heightened and worsened by COVID. As I say, we've got over 6,000 people now in temporary accommodation, and that number is continuing to increase. And with restrictions easements, then we're anticipating a further increase again. We need to look into the private rented sector. It's got to be a realistic and affordable housing option to provide that greater choice and flexibility. We've got a few Pathfinder PRS leasing schemes across Wales, again, which are being driven forward using Welsh Government funding. But in my view, that needs to be speeded up. We are seeing we cannot accommodate within our social housing sector all that need. So we have to look at other realistic housing options. So how can we work with our private sector landlords to incentivize, to make that the attractive option of working with local authorities to accommodate those people who are in need, and how can we make this an affordable and long-term solution? Sorry. So just a final few points from me then. I think Ruth did mention about the need for a culture shift and that principle that everyone is housing and tenancy ready with the right wraparound support. We welcome the opportunity of aligning our statutory homelessness services more with the housing support grant and the support provider perspective as far as that is concerned. But we do also see that we need to be making sure that we bring services such as social care services and complex needs services. How can we bring those services to those who need it? And not vice versa, not expecting our homeless to need to travel to access our health or social care services. Also making those services flexible and available when they are needed, i.e. over the weekends, for example. We recognise that we as local authorities need to shift in terms of some of the culture changes, adopting that person-centred and trauma-informed approach. But I think the emphasis is for us in terms of moving forward on our trajectory as far as developing our rapid rehousing models are concerned, is that there is no single way, there is no right way of how we approach this, because each local authority is different. Be it a rural or an urban authority, and our housing need is very different in terms of our availability and numbers of social housing, our access and affordability into the private rented sector, for example. So we have to be flexible in terms of our approaches as far as rapid rehousing is concerned. We're also recognising that we are all starting this journey together as well. So we are learning, obviously Scotland is being seen as that pathfinder, and there are many excellent examples of good practice. Not just in Scotland, but what's already been set up and established in Wales as well. So we're on this journey together, and how can we move forward together as far as sharing that good practice, and how can we scale up some of the good practice and the work that's already started. So that's about it as far as I'm concerned. You know, as local authority, as I say, we are concerned but relish the opportunity of repurposing our services to make them more fit for purpose in terms of this challenge moving forward.
Thank you so much, Gaynor. That was fantastic. Really highlighted some of the complexities, particularly within local authorities around the different focuses, the corporate view, and the view within the kind of departments responsible for housing support, that bringing together of the kind of capital and strategic housing functions with the support functions as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. And for someone who only joined the panel 24 hours ago, that was a very impressive contribution. So thank you again for that. Last but certainly not least, before we go to the Q&A, we're going to hear from Catrin Stark. Catrin has recently joined Cadwyn Housing Association as Director of Housing, but has a really strong background in homelessness and housing prior to that. So Catrin, welcome to the conference, and please share your perspective from an RSL. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, just to say, those of you that don't maybe know a little bit about Cadwyn, just by way of introduction, Cadwyn is a small community-based housing association with really strong values on fairness, honesty, kindness and respect. We've been working in restorative approaches for a few years now. We're very much rooted in the Cardiff community, and we provide, as well as our core housing stock across the city, we also provide multiple other services, including supported family housing for people experiencing homeless. And we believe that change is needed, and this new approach to emergency accommodation and rapid rehousing is going to need more collaboration, even more person-centred approaches, and more or different resources, and, as has already been said, a different culture. Around co-production and person-centred approaches, the concept of co-production and person-centred approaches will likely not be new to any of you. And as Ruth mentioned in her presentation, engagement with individuals is absolutely key to the delivery of effective rapid rehousing approaches. Any approach that we use will need to be trauma-informed, taking into account the kind of specific past experiences of the individual. For example, previous spells of experiencing homelessness will have impacted on the individual and will likely affect their views on future housing requirements or what that support needs to look like in order for them to achieve. So not only in types of, so we really need to think about, as has already been mentioned, as Gaynor just mentioned there, this is not just about a one-size-fits-all. People need a whole plethora of options from which they can then choose the kind of key determinant of how likely they are then to succeed in maintaining their tenancy. Needs assessment must be thorough and standardised, and assessment sessions conducted in a way that is psychologically informed. And at the risk of dragging our old friend Maslow out, we have to consider that housing, warmth and safety is that first rung on the ladder, really. And whilst RSLs can provide that first stage, support is needed across many functions far beyond the stretch of housing to ensure that people are able to flourish and are able to live a truly fulfilled life, which is what we want for everybody. The offer of accommodation must take into account the most appropriate type of accommodation needed for that individual. And again, as has been mentioned, we can't automatically assume that that is all about single self-contained accommodation. For some, shared accommodation might be a preference. Tenant choice over location is really important, and whilst that is difficult for us to manage as an RSL and with the local authorities to manage, we do also recognise how that can have a huge impact on how likely an individual is to form networks and community links and feel like they're at home and a part of their local area. The support provided within the accommodation offer not only needs to be considered from whether or not they need 24 hours, 7 days a week kind of levels or support, or then the other end of the spectrum, a kind of light touch housing floating support service, but also from the wider concept of that holistic support. And as we've seen from the approaches in Scotland, the rapid rehousing approaches do kind of fall apart, or they fail when all of those parties are not at the table. And for many, many years within housing and supported housing sector, and I've been here for sort of 15 years now, we've talked about this need for holistic support and having key partners from health, social work, education, substance misuse, mental health, employment, offending and so on. However, it is quite an idealistic viewpoint, and the reason why it is idealistic is it's so incredibly difficult to achieve in a consistent and comprehensive fashion, and that is the difficulty with this, as has been mentioned. Wherever possible, we need to be involving service users in the co-production of pathways. They're the experts. They'll be able to tell us what is and isn't working within existing service provision, and we'll also be able to identify new approaches that might help us. It's all too easy for us to, as service providers, to fall into the trap of thinking that we know what is best for others and how we can do unto others. But the true essence of rapid rehousing is providing those options that are flexible enough to be able to respond to changing need. And until we're truly intentional in engaging with our service users around this, then I think we'll continue to miss opportunities. As has been mentioned, our allocations processes must be fair and transparent, and they must give access to the right opportunities for people. Again, learning from experiences of common housing registers, choice-based lettings approaches, how do we develop those things further so that people get the best opportunity to succeed in their tenancies? So moving on now around the kind of specific key concerns for RSLs. I don't think there would be many colleagues that would disagree with the potential that we have in front of us and the true opportunity that rapid rehousing presents for us. However, there will also be many reservations that people will have around the process and the reassurances that will be on offer. The importance of partnership working, as we've heard many times today already, the importance of partnership working is going to be absolutely essential to this, especially between the local authorities, RSLs, and then the support providers as well. The levels of housing support grant will need to be increased in order to deliver such a programme. And the latest increase, as Gaynor has just said, is incredibly welcome. And it would be hoped that this would continue to be supported and even increased in future, regardless of the party in power, to enable RSLs to increase our stock, to have better options available to us to develop and to engage better forward planning exercises with local authorities so that we can make sure that we are building to what the need that local authority and that community needs. We have to start looking more creatively at the use of the housing support grant, so aligning local authority rapid rehousing plans with the HSG allocations and not restricting those options just to the traditional providers of supported housing. So widening opportunities for RSLs to apply and work creatively within their teams to provide essential crisis intervention services that currently staffing levels and structures don't always allow. One of the experiences from Scottish programmes reported by Crisis was around identification of support need and how that varied in approach and then therefore how outcomes varied. So what they found was in kind of densely populated city areas where they kind of may be more used to kind of high level kind of complex need cases, they reported figures of just over 80% of people presenting to them as being low or no support needs, whereas in more rural areas that figure sat at around 30%. So there's a differing kind of assessment of need and understanding of needs and support needs, and actually then that made it really difficult for them to assess the appropriateness of the move on accommodation, what that support then looked like. So we need to think about how we across Wales will consistently and coherently assess needs to ensure that we're providing the best opportunity for people, whilst also reflecting, as Gaynor said, on the level of support provision, the level of housing or the lack thereof in more rural Wales in comparison to maybe city regions. Across the board, looking at local letting policies need to be agreed and they need to be consistent across the local authority area, ensuring that there is kind of proportional contribution from RSLs. So within Cadwyn, our current allocations are 69% from the homelessness list, and we really strongly believe in supporting the local authority in their response to homelessness. However, I think it would be neglectful if I didn't note that actually that does have a big impact on our resources. So with a typical caseload of 400 to 500 units per neighbourhood or housing officer, there simply is not the resource available within RSLs to respond really quickly and effectively to high level need. This will obviously differ across local authorities and across RSL sizes and what additional programmes they may have to offer, but it is still a consideration for most that we just don't have that flexibility within the existing structures. This issue is then further compounded when the holistic support that we talked about earlier on then isn't delivered, as has been the case again for a number of the kind of cases in Scotland. This leaves the tenant at risk, and it puts us as landlords really a kind of great deal of pressure on us really to make sure that people are safe. The support that is provided must be provided for a sustained period and can't just be delivered solely through kind of helicopter style floating support services. The support must be long term. It must be agile enough to respond and support to people when they need it the most. And when we all of us will experience different times and different fluctuations in our support needs, and that is kind of standard. So we need to make sure that there are rapid re-entry points, that there is crisis intervention, and that people are supported in the way and at the times that they need it most. And finally, from me, I think, and as again has been reiterated today, before any programmes kind of go live, then there is a need really for whole-scale culture change. We've worked for so many years within the prove your tenancy ready kind of style approach, with the assumption that, because people are homeless or currently experiencing homelessness, that they must, I don't know, maybe need to be trained in how to pay bills, for example. Now, we've come so far from that already, we really have. However, there is still a long way to go before that staircase approach is genuinely abolished, and that we can say with all integrity that allocations aren't based on proof of ability. Every person has a right to a home, and whilst RSLs have a huge part to play in that process, we also cannot do it alone. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks very much, Catrin. Well, 3 fantastic contributions there from different perspectives, different types of organisations, but I think a lot of similar references, similar themes that are coming up through that of supply, of support, of multi-agency, of partnership working, of planning, making sure that we understand the needs, both housing and support needs, and the levels of support needs that Ruth mentioned. Lots of really, really important things for us to think about. I've got a couple of questions. So all of you, to a certain extent, have touched on the need for a change in approach or a change in culture, whether that be within local authorities, about getting corporate buy-in, or about how we ration housing or utilise priority need, whether that be in RSLs, about how you use allocations or evictions, or about support providers who may provide emergency accommodation, needing to think about what they might need to do differently. So from your perspective, how do we win those hearts and minds where we need that cultural change, that system change, both within and outside of the sector? And what would your message be to anyone who might be listening today, who might be from an organisation that does need to change in order to get on board the rapid rehousing train, and any messages that you have for that? I don't know who wants to go first. Ruth?
Yeah, I suppose just on a very generic level, I would say it's taking the opportunity that COVID presents. So, in terms of change, a key part of change is getting people ready for change, and that kind of concept of unfreezing people from the position they're in now so they're open and ready to change. And COVID presents this enormous opportunity because we've all been unfrozen. Everything is different. So we can create, what people call a new normal much more easily, having been through COVID and all being in recovery and looking forward. Yeah, so I think I would say that. I think the second thing I would say is, I think the big challenge is getting from a position of having senior level buy-in and organisations being held to account for translating that into action in terms of frontline delivery. Because I think everybody wants the same thing, but driving that culture down right to the front line, to staff who are stressed and have other challenges and constraints, and may simply just need more time to work differently, I think is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And the support there for staff, I think, you know, whenever we enter a challenging period or a period of change, it's about making sure that, you know, people are able to have the support that they need to go through that change as well. And particularly, as you said, the people on the front line who have had a, you know, a hell of a year, really doing some extraordinary stuff, but are absolutely exhausted, and resilience, you know, is at a really low level. Gaynor, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just a couple of points really. You know, in terms of, you know, how can we change our approach? I look at it from a corporate perspective, then, you know, as an organisation, and as community leaders, you know, in terms of some of the work that we do. So, you know, we need to change the hearts and minds corporately in terms of um, raising the profile. And I think COVID has sort of put the spotlight in terms of the homelessness challenges that we do have, and that hidden homeless in particular. But it's how can we sustain that now, in terms of recognizing that it's not, it doesn't remain a housing issue. And I'm saying that from with a local, just a purely a local authority hat on here, is how can we get that political buy-in, and organisational buy-in in relation to making it a corporate priority, and in doing that, looking at it from a community priority and a public sector priority then as well. So I'm looking at it from that strategic perspective, that we do need to, you know, whether it's a top-down approach from Welsh Government sort of pushing on that agenda, and then from ourselves in terms of pushing it up the agenda, it needs to be that multi-agency, multifactorial sort of pronged attack then really, in terms of raising that profile. You know, that is a key, you know, ask for us in terms of making sure that we get that buy-in and that change in approach. So, and that's from that corporate strategic level. From a staffing perspective, I totally agree with what you're saying, Katie. You know, staff are tired. You know, they're battle weary. So you know, that does give me cause for concern. You know, as a, you know, as a sort of service manager for that. You know, how can we work with our staff to reinvigorate that enthusiasm? You know, you know, we need to do that sort of planning work in terms of this rapid rehousing and in terms of the housing support element, and bringing those together. You know, that we need to buy ourselves some time then really to do that planning. You know, unfortunately, where you'd historically get everybody in a room together and to hammer it out in terms of some sort of planning work, you know, we need to look at it differently. But we do need to really look inwardly at our staff then and see how can we support them, how can we provide the necessary training and skills development really to look towards this new way of working. So I'm not giving you many answers, it's just these are the reflections that we are going through.
And I think those are all really useful reflections, because all of the organisations watching this conference today will be thinking about these things. And as I said when I introduced this session, it's not like we have all the answers. If we had all the answers, we'd be at rapid rehousing today. You know, we're going to have lots of discussions and lots of unknowns as we move forward. Catrin, did you want to come in on anything?
I think absolutely agree around the kind of the front line and actually being really mindful of what we're kind of trying to move forward with, and be really mindful of where people are at right now. But also being mindful of where the local authority are at. It's almost a bit of a kind of halfway house really for an RSL, because we fully understand the kind of the duty still doesn't stop. You know, people still need supporting, people still need housing, and it's finding that balance, isn't it? And I think really, in terms of certainly my experience, resistance isn't at the front line. Actually, it's about to kind of on a wider level, the organisation. How does that feel? What's the board appetite for kind of new ways of working, and what risks? Where's the risk appetite? But also how we fit in, and the assurances that we need as an RSL that we will have that support in place that will provide that wraparound support. So I think it's any culture change, you know, it takes many years, doesn't it? But I think there is I don't think there's, for me, my experience with our team, we've got a fantastic team, and that, you know, and they'd be really up for that. I just think it's about it's the timing right now, isn't it, as you described, you know, so that they're not fatigued when we're asking more and more of them. But yeah, I think there's a kind of wider board and governance kind of risk appetite that needs to be expressed from RSLs, really, to make decisions on a kind of more strategic level.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you make a really good point, Catrin. I think with, you know, the pressure from regulators, the pressure financially, you know, there's lots of things that boards of housing associations have on their mind at the moment. But, you know, we need to ensure that social purpose is front and centre, that contribution to ending homelessness is front and centre, that, you know, as you said, there is a consistent approach and accountability around allocations and evictions, because, you know, otherwise there'll be some who are pulling their weight, some maybe less so. And you know, as Gaynor talked about, getting corporate buy-in from across the local authority, you know, it's the same in an RSL. There are different departments within RSLs who are focused on the more commercial stuff, on the social purpose stuff, and it's about joining that up and making sure people are singing on from the same hymn sheet. Just before we finish, I'm worried we're running out of time, but I wondered if there was any reflections that you had. So a lot of you have talked about a shift in culture from other services that you've worked in partnership with. So the likes of mental health, substance use, social care during this pandemic. Do you think that there has been a permanent culture shift that you can build on, or are you concerned that this partnership was a response to a crisis, and that once we're out of the crisis, things could just return to how they were before, with poor partnership working? Or do you think that, you know, there is real buy-in now? There's a real kind of new understanding of homelessness and the part that other agencies can play? Any takers?
I think it's like anything, isn't it? We go in with the hope that it will remain and that we will continue to have this great way of working. I think it's only really, for me, it's how much those other service providers are enabled to continue working in that vein. So that's where we need kind of guidance and advice and support from WAG, from government, to say that this is the standard, this is what the expectation is, so that they are enabled. It's like anything, really, isn't it? Any of those providers that you mentioned, Katie, they equally have their own strains, their own kind of limitations. And I guess it's about how we patiently find a way forward that meets everyone's needs, but with the Welsh Government really setting that kind of stall, really, as to what expectations are moving forward. Yeah,
absolutely. Gaynor?
I think we've started the journey, but we're at a very early part of that journey. You know, what we are seeing, and I'm talking from a sort of some of the meetings that we've had sort of regionally, and the housing support grant, you know, provider sort of network, etc. But what we are experiencing is that there is still that challenge in relation to accessing that, the timeliness of the right services and the right time and the right location. And because of the high thresholds that exist for accessing many of these services, you know, we are experiencing difficulties, you know, from the third sector being able to access and being even able to refer into any health or social care services. You know, it's about, so there is a long journey that's needed, you know. So Welsh Government sort of support to enable health boards and other partners to move forward on that would be welcomed. In particular for complex, you know, for cases where there are complex needs that, you know, people don't fit into a convenient box as to whether they've got mental health issues. You know, they've got differing needs, they've got complex needs. So, you know, the way that services have been designed is that you've got to fit into that particular criteria and condition before you're able to access that services. So we really need to look at this differently. So really keen that that has to be something that we do push forward on, you know, as a key element of moving forward on this sort of journey then as such.
Thanks very much, Gaynor. Ruth?
Yeah, just briefly, I would say, you know, I get the sense as somebody relatively new in the sector that yes, a new understanding has been reached. I think I would come back to being very mindful of the people who fall through the net and really emphasising that doesn't mean that the success that's been achieved shouldn't be celebrated, but there are still people falling through the net. So I think if there is a real commitment, and sort of going back to my slides, that sort of plan, do, review, if there's a real commitment to honestly plan the best we can, do the best we can, review the best we can, with all of the openness and honesty that is necessary to learn about something incredibly complex and challenging, then I think that when we can then refresh and renew that commitment as we go through that plan, do, review cycle. So yeah, I think embrace the fact that it's complex, be willing to learn, and allow partners to be open about the challenges that they face in terms of delivering and standing up to this enormous challenge that we're kind of facing together. But yeah, it all feels doable. It feels doable, and we can refresh that commitment.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Absolutely agree with everything that you've said, and I think the leadership from Welsh Government will be essential, that true commitment to homelessness not just being a housing issue. Some of the leadership that we've seen, certainly from within the mental health and vulnerable groups division, and we'll hear from Tracy Brahini about that in the rest of our conference later today. You know, making sure that there's that strategic perspective, that the funding is in place to support that multidisciplinary approach, I think will be absolutely critical. But as you rightly say, Ruth, having the empathy and understanding of the situation that other agencies are in and the pressures that are on them, and all coming to the table openly and honestly, and willing to engage and willing to learn from things that don't quite go as well as we'd hoped. I could spend hours in this conversation. The three of you have been absolutely fantastic, and I'm already getting messages saying what a great session. The speakers have been brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak here. I think those were three critical perspectives to help us continue this conversation as we move on this journey towards rapid rehousing. And I'm very, very grateful to all of you for making the time today and sharing your expertise and experience. It's been a fantastic session. Diolch Marianne, thank you so much. Reminder to everyone that we have a session that is specifically aimed at frontline workers that starts at 12:30. Other people are welcome to come, but please make the space for frontline workers to have their voices heard. It's about psychologically informed approaches. That starts at 12:30, and we'll see you back in the main conference at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much all for your attendance and engagement. Diolch Marianne, the fantastic panel and the questions that came in, and see you later. Thank you.